One of my favorite analogies is like a beautiful tapestry, and it has threads of gold and silver that run through the whole thing, and that's what gives the whole of the liturgical year and the whole of the pericope its unity, and that's why even on a given Sunday, it's usually not impossible to find a fairly common theme. The threads, maybe 3 or 4 great doctrines that are always going to be prominent, if not every Sunday, almost every Sunday. Justification, obviously. The doctrine of the means of grace, effective means of grace. The doctrine of original sin. And the one that's most often forgotten, the theology of the cross. Those are the 4 great strands that run through every pericope series every Sunday. The text always has a surprise. It doesn't come out the way that you'd expect. Who would stand all day long with arms stretched? Go to see my niece, Gertrude. Uncle Pastors come. Big deal. Uncle Pastors come. Gertrude, come down here. Here's Uncle Pastor. Na? Gertrude, es kommt der Weihnachtsmann. Come down here. Maybe you would do it for a minute, maybe 2. After 5, you look like a blooming idiot. God, all day long. What day? Yesterday? Yeah. All day. Today? All day long. No human being would do that. No human being would do that. Only a fool would do that. And so God, in His love for us, makes a fool out of Himself by standing there all day.
Again, those prayers, that prayer together with the Benedictus Deus focuses our attention. For He, the center of the Word, has found me in it, and He wants to make Himself the center of my life and work, even as I have been the center of His. That's something, too, that you think about, maybe more in the epistles than even in the Gospels. But there, too. Wrap your mind around that for a moment. That's what the gospel is all about, isn't it? He has made you the center of His life. Just this thought. How often in the Gospels, and especially in St. Paul's explication of the gospel, of the doctrine of justification, how often in the Scriptures does God show us that He loves us more than we could ever love Him?
He gave His one and only Son as Savior that way, Savior of the world, our Savior. The Savior who then trudges His long and lonely journey up to the altar of the cross, thinking about that world and everyone in it, thinking about you and thinking about me. He hangs there alone and abandoned on the cross. He suffers the torments of all that the damned deserve as He cries out for you, as He cries out for me, as He cries out for the world. My God, why hast Thou forsaken me? That's how much He loved us. Doesn't it just take your breath away?
In college, my first year in college, I worked in a bakery, and it was my job on Saturday mornings. They delivered the stuff, the 100-pound sacks of flour and salt and sugar and whatever, and it came down a chute. This big truck drove up in the back alley and dropped these bags, these 100-pound sacks, down this chute, and it was my job to be sure that I was underneath that chute and to catch these 100-pound sacks on my shoulder, because, of course, if I didn't, they would drop and break open, and there would go my $1.40 an hour. And the olden days, that was still a wage. At any rate, I remember the first time I did that, I didn't know there were that many places in the human body that could hurt. You know? With the passing of time, I got used to it. And I knew that I would be able to do it. I would be able to catch this 100-pound sack of whatever and run to the other end and drop it where it was supposed to be dropped and run back and be able to catch this other sack. I knew that I would succeed, but that doesn't mean I wasn't wiped out when it was done. Jesus knew he would succeed. There was no possibility that he wouldn't succeed. Nevertheless, the struggle was a grueling one, even though there was no possibility of his defeat. Yeah, it's not to those passages that we look for the proof of infant baptism. We look to other passages for that, like the institution of baptism, all nations, or these little children which believe in me, so on. Usually when you get into an argument, I used to tell students at Northwestern, every now and again they'd get into an argument with somebody from Maranatha would come along and they get into an argument about infant baptism. And I always thought that they make a mistake. You make a mistake when you get into an argument about infant baptism. Get into an argument instead about, is it an effective means of grace? Because once you establish that it's an effective means of grace, the whole idea of whether infants should be baptized disappears. The important point is that it's a means of grace. Well, if it's a means of grace by which God invites us to believe and gives what he invites us to do, then sure, infants should be baptized. But you fight on foreign soil when you just argue about whether infants can believe or not. Argue instead about whether it's a means of grace, and then that question gets answered. The promise, even in Acts, the promise is to you and to your children. The imagery of the church. What's the church to Christ? His bride. And I always like to repeat that. You got to remember that. She's always a bride. Not a 2,000-year-old hag who's drooping. Always a bride who's pursued with ardor, with passion, for whom he yearns. Rumor has it that's how it went. I wouldn't know. Yeah, for whom he yearns, after whom he longs. Always a bride. All these pictures, and the parables are like that. The parables take things that God made to remind us of things that we do not see. I guess that's the simplest way I can think of to put it. When I lived, you should pardon the expression, in New Ulm, my house was set up kind of high, and I could look over on my neighbor's garage, and he had an air conditioning unit that stuck out of the window of his garage, and there was a pair of robins that liked to nest there every year. And I could see all that was going on. I could see they're sitting on the eggs, and then when the eggs hatched, I could see those robins, Mr. and Mrs. Robin, scurrying about. Schnell, hurry, hurry. And there were those little robin chicks. Gimme. And as soon as they had had enough, what did they do? They left and never came back. Nice metaphor. Yeah. I remember Jeremiah 31:31 always springs to mind. Professor Eichmann, while he was still living, we haven't done much together since he died. While he was still living, gave me a translation, a German translation of the Bible.